All right. Well, greetings. My name is Kurt Fifelski. I'm the Assistant Director of Debate at the University of Michigan. And now what I'm about to talk to you about is how the lecture you just heard is all heresy. And I know this because I saw the line of you running to Starbucks as soon as the lecture was over. So I think you are all in agreement that there is some desire for capitalism in this world. Quick overview. I'm going to go through some definitions. Then go through a quantitative analysis of trends as it relates to capitalism and liberalism. I will go through common link arguments as well as just some general permutation setups. We'll then talk about the impact turns, about why capitalism is good, sustainable, and ethical. Then I will have a discussion about why alternatives to capitalism are not feasible, and if so, they aren't desirable. And then I will give my little spiel about why I think DDEV is a horrible impact turn. We will discuss framework in the ethics of capitalism, and then at the end, we'll tie it all together with some of the ideas about how you can execute a cap good strategy. First thing I want to do is just kind of give you some definitions of capitalism, liberalism, and neoliberalism. This is a definition from the IMF about capitalism. There's many different definitions that exist out there, but I think this one encapsulates it pretty nicely. And it's just an economic system in which actors control property in their own interests, and we let supply and demand determine consumption and what is out there. Profit is good, is this idea. Very easily conflated with just some ideas of libertarianism, that we should just have no government, let the markets do everything. Most capitalists don't think that. They think that capitalism doesn't really account for the negative externalities of growth, and that's where public policy comes in. Liberalism, as per Wikipedia, and the way that I'd like to discuss it, is just the idea that the market should function freely and individuals should have autonomy, government should be limited, and freedom should be protected. And we can get to this from John Stuart Mill's 1848 Principles of Political Economy, which provides many of the foundations for the idea as it relates to capitalism. He warns in the seminal text that communism and socialism cannot properly account for the demands of the market and won't take advantage of comparative advantage, which is something that is necessary for growth and happiness. Neoliberalism is a very nebulous term that the definition of which will vary based off of who is talking about it. You can have the takes of like it's Reaganism or Thatcherism, or you can have any of these just six general takes. Henry Giroux, an author that nobody reads in debate anymore, calls it a combination of Christian fundamentalism, neoconservatism, and jingoistic patriotism, and somehow describes it as George W. Bush incarnate. And there's others that just say it's using global trade policy, the evil Chicago School of Economics, to marginalize the global South. I identify as neoliberal, but I also think of it in a different way than what most people do in debate. It's just the idea that markets are necessary to generate prosperity, and the goal of public policy is to make sure to minimize the negative externalities of that. So it is a combination of the ideas of classical liberalism and capitalism, with a role for the state and protections for others. So new liberals often believe in liberal values, so what Mill's discussed. Some idea of social liberalism, that an inclusive society is one that is better than the alternatives. There should be, the big thing right now is a housing policy, that we should use social policy, so often through deregulation, to make things better. We should not have NIMBYism. Most neoliberals would identify as YIMBYs. Density is good. A free market is necessary with a strong social safety net for when the market fails. Trade is good. Open borders should be less regulated. We should allow immigrants to flow freely to and from where they want. And we should use the market in pragmatic ways to solve problems. And some of the best examples, or the best example, is probably the pinnacle of policy, the carbon tax, which is something that is easily advocated for, and people who are opposed to it don't understand math. I now call this next session okay doomer. I found a meme on the internet, but I didn't know if it was PC or not, so I decided not to use it. And the idea here has three theses. The first is that violence is on the decline. It has not been consistent. It ebbs and flows. It has not reached zero, nor will it ever. This trend can easily be reversed through things like autocracy. We can look at it, and we can look at this through historical and long-term scales. The second thesis is that institutions and norms have brought out our better angels and made the world a safer place. And third, most people in debate, or the third thesis is most people in debate do not understand the basic application of this argument, in part because debaters are bad at math. So there's a series of trends that can demonstrate this. First is the pacification process. If you go back to Hobbes, which many of you should be familiar with the Leviathan by this point, or you will when you get to college, the idea of the state of nature is something in which the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Life was violent. And we know this because we can look at some of the trends through archaeological evidence that demonstrates the rates at which there was violent death. Primarily just the number and signs of trauma on the remains of human beings that have been found, which would include fractured skulls, broken bones, arrowheads in skulls, etc. And through most of human history, about 15% of deaths were violent. That trend has changed. That today, even if you can tweak math to your advantage somehow, you can get that up to 1%. And this is not something that you can see how trends change over time. These are different groups of people, and all of a sudden, we're here in the 21st century or 20th century, and it's infinitesimal in comparison to previous trends. Here, I don't remember what this slide is for. This also includes those prehistoric trends with some of the most violent societies in the world in the 20th century. So we have Nazi Germany and World War I Germany, Russia, which just loved killing people, Japan, which was at war for the first 50 years of the 20th century, the US, which was involved in many of these wars, and just general trends of the world. Even at its height, it comes close to some of the safer societies to have been involved in. This decline can be contributed to a couple of different things. First is the rise of states. When states maintained a hegemonic form of power over violence, which means that they were able to stamp out raiding and feuding within societies. Yes. Second, we have the civilizing process, where we can track data from states to see where this massive decline of violence occurred. Norbert Elias, in a 1939 book that was quickly forgotten because of World War II, traces this, and he watches the trends through human history, showing that commerce and the creation of money were something that helped drive down violence. Charts prove this. Here we can see the number of homicides that have occurred in I guess this is Europe, and how they decreased from every 100,000 people, so 1 in 1,000 people at one point in history to 1 in every 100,000 people. And we also know that some of this has occurred through the humanitarian revolution. This is where we have seen the eradication of things like judicial torture. The death penalty is illegal or no longer exists in most countries, and even in the United States, that trend has decreased. And by and large, the thing that existed for all of human history, slavery, has decreased. So here we can see the abolition of judicial torture pretty much eliminated over time. The death penalty in Europe, gone. Slavery, the number of abolitions over time, so as it increases, and now no longer a thing. And we can really contribute this to a lot of things. There is the idea of affluence and wealth, that when it is easier to trade with somebody, than it is to steal from them. You will just trade with them. And the other is the idea of literacy and cosmopolitanism that came along largely from the printing press and just the idea of the Enlightenment. Turns out as people became smarter and more empathetic with people around them, they were more willing to understand the feelings of other people, even if it was just across the English Channel or something, and more willing to change institutions to make things better. So here we can see the rise of affluence in advanced economies and how GDP increase continued to occur, never really hitting negative in most of these economies. And more importantly, global literacy rates also correspond with these trends of the decrease of violence, with good portions of the world being in the 90 to 100 percentile of this. We can see some ideas of a long peace existing over time. We can see the number of battle deaths decreasing to very small levels, and that's a good thing. This leaves us with some zeros that we currently have. There have not been wars against great powers recently, or at least since World War II, pending what happens in Ukraine with NATO. There's not been nuclear weapons used in battle in a long time. No wars between European countries until Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and no wars of developed countries. And we are able to define this in multiple ways. First, state-based armed conflict is just when 25 people or more have been killed, and a war is when 1,000 or more people have been killed. So a pretty low standard for setting some of this. Historically, we can see that there's been many trends at which people have been involved in wars very, very frequently. So this is just in Europe. The number of years in each century in which there was wars going on, and for most of that time, there's a great deal of warfare lowering. Globally, we can see how this has occurred with the green being civil wars, the peach color being international civil wars, interstate wars being the blue, and colonial wars, and just the dramatic decline from 1946 to 2012. This red line here is where the founding book for much of this idea, Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, was written in 2008. So a slight tick up in 2012, largely, I believe, based off of the war in Syria. A couple ideas for why this decline has occurred. First is Immanuel Kant's perpetual peace, which suggests that democracy, trade, and an international community would be something favorable. Second, attitudes towards war have changed. Well, you all play video games and stuff like that. There's no longer battles in the Roman Colosseum of people fighting to the death for entertainment. So there has been some change in that direction. And international norms have developed, particularly through the use of international institutions. Violence has not just declined towards each other through war. There's also been massive rights revolutions, including the rights of animals. You all are probably too young to get what either of these references are, but this is Cecil the lion, which was killed in Harambe, which are things that humans found appalling when they happened. 30 years ago, it wouldn't even made the newspaper. And we can see how this also has rights have expanded to humans through expansion of civil rights, rights towards women and gender minorities, children's rights. Many fewer kids working in sweatshops than there used to be, and again, animal rights. And animal rights can also be envisioned through just the amount of the increase in vegetarianism and veganism globally. Most countries have decriminalized homosexuality over time, not all, but many. And the idea of segregation has become much more appalling to Americans over the course of this time in comparison to what it was just 60 years ago. Let's get past this to save some time. But we do know that there are some things that can cause cause violence. There's not a neurological receptor in our brains that triggers it, but there are things that do cause it. First is just the idea of exploitation and predation. I can just take from you in order to achieve what I want. This is the fundamental argument for capitalist peace, is that we can limit that. Second is just the quest of dominance, to take over things and expand horizons. Third is revenge killings, wars fought over revenge. For instance, maybe the U.S. going to war in Iraq for no real reason. And fourth is utopian ideology, which will be the bulk of the alternative section that I talk about. But it turns out, if you believe in a utopian ideology, any amount of death is acceptable because you think that in the end the world will be perfect. And this is very obviously found in communism, Stalinism, Leninism, and Maoism. We are developing, as humans, self-control in order to deal with violence. We can see this through a series of studies that have been done about how people respond to being aggravated. As cosmopolitanism expands, people are becoming more empathetic towards others. We just generally have a better moral sense. We can kind of see this with how people just get along better. And we can also kind of think through the ramifications often of what will happen if we go to war. A couple of theories that relate to this are just the Leviathan. So the Hobbes idea that we need to have a monopoly on violence. Second is the gentle commerce, which we'll be talking about with the impact turns. And this is just the idea that plunder is zero-sum, but trade is positive-sum. So it's cheaper to trade than it is to steal. And countries with open economies are just less likely to go to war, in part because of trade with one another. Third is evolution. This is made famous by Peter Singer, but the idea actually begins with Charles Darwin, that at one point in human history, our ideas of empathy were really just directed towards our immediate family and friends. That circle is expanding to more and more people over the course of human history, which is largely because of cosmopolitanism. And lastly is the expansion of the escalator of reason. The expansion of literacy has meant that we are able to more abstractly think. We find violence to be a problem that should be solved rather than something that should be won through conquest. We can help. So this escalator of reason can be fueled through things like democracy, trade, open and fair media that gives things much more credibility, and then the reliance on education and experts who are capable of teaching things. Now, like I said, these trends could be going in the opposite direction. There's obviously, and Putinism seems to be kind of the biggest thing. The issue with where violence is rising, though, is not with these open liberal democracies, but autocracies, right? Russia. If a war happens in Taiwan, it won't be because Taiwan was capitalist, but because they had an autocratic neighbor that thought it was their territory. And cats like to kill stuff. Now, one thing that we don't think about often is how we think about violence. There's never, at the end of when you turn on the 6 o'clock news, there's never a person standing outside of a hospital that says, a 91-year-old woman died of old age today. It's no, that somebody got shot someplace, and that is the problem. And media really relies on the if it bleeds, it leads phenomenon. And when we're talking about the link debate shortly, I'll also suggest the same thing with a lot of the cherry-picked arguments that communists are willing to make. We also just at the same time have fake news out there on both sides, but primarily on the far right, fueling some of these ideas that the world is much worse off than what we actually believe it to be. But at the same time, we have people that just think the world is irrevocably ruined and we have to destroy it in order to usher in socialism. The thing that you should do as a good capitalist is use data on your side to be able to prove some of the arguments that you are looking at. And the way that we should think about data is through proportions. Yes, more people die in absolute numbers in violent death when there's 8 billion people on the planet than what they did when there was 4 million. But that does not mean that you are more likely to die a violent death than what was the case, 200 years ago. All right. So that is the section on why we should be optimistic. Now, let's talk about the link debate. So I saw this the other day, and it immediately made me think of many of the link arguments that are occurring at the camp. For those that can't read it, at Marxist777 writes, why the Titanic submarine incident will be a victory for the working class. Here's a thread. And this is a real thing. There was an entire thread about why it is good. Many of the links that I have heard so far at the camp have been, you are capitalist because you give people jobs. And that's very much in line with the, we should just sink submarines because it will be good for the working class. Often people, the way that the link debate will get framed, I'm sure Kevin just talked about this at length, but this is how you should posit it and think about how you're writing your AF answers to the CapK. Does the plan cause growth? Often an easy link argument for the negative is you make growth look good, that's awesome, and that's bad. Does the plan export violence onto the global south somehow? Do we cause wars someplace? Some of the just general security K type arguments. Third, does the plan somehow cause inequality to get worse? Most of your asks should be designed to answer that question with a no. If not, then you might want to go back to the drawing board and change some things around. Or does it just make it so people have the ability to go to work? And lastly, does the AF do something from your perspective, do you resolve a problem from the status quo? You can both, the CapK is kind of fun because you can both answer the link a little